2012 has been a monumental year in the United Kingdom. Not only did London host the Summer Olympics, but this year marks the bicentennial of Charles Dickens. Literary enthusiasts all over the world have celebrated the genius's life. Joining me once again is Gerald Dickens, actor and great-great-grandson of Mr. Dickens. Gerald will be performing his one-man Christmas carol once again on Tuesday, December 4th at 7 p.m. at the Wilson Auditorium at the Metropolitan Campus of Fairleigh Dickinson University. Gerald, welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's going to be a great pleasure to come back to Fairleigh Dickinson. I'm thoroughly looking forward to it.
You were just wonderful, and people have been talking about you all year round. Speaking of all year round, you've had a very busy year.
It has been just the most wonderful year. We are fortunate in the Dickens family that Charles's birthday was in February, so we got all our celebrations in before the Queen's Jubilee and the Olympics and all the other big things. So the Dickens bicentennial celebrations were really the first big thing of a monumental year in Britain. And it was an extraordinary week. We had the actual day itself was marked with a memorial service at Westminster Abbey in London, where he's buried. And then the following week, there was a reception at Buckingham Palace with the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. And all through that, we just kept pinching ourselves, saying that this isn't real, this isn't happening, it's extraordinary.
Which makes me wonder, how many members of the royal family have the Dickens family met over the years?
Oh, do you know? There's a good essay to write. I have no idea.
So you'll be returning to Fairleigh Dickinson University on the 4th to perform your wonderful Christmas carol, which everyone just adored. I loved it, and for information, you can call 201-692-6500. But that is one of several shows you've been touring.
That's right. But back in England, mainly, I have a number of different programs that I tour, some based on his novels. I have a performance of Nicholas Nickleby, which is similar in style to the Christmas Carol. But I also have a number of one-man shows based on aspects of his life and his career, his travels to America, recreating some of the readings that he did when he toured in the 1860s. So it's been a very exciting year to be able to perform all of these different styles of shows throughout Britain, also in America. And the interest has just not waned at all. It's been, I wondered if the Olympics would have an effect, that Britain would get Olympic fever and then forget about the Dickens bicentennial, but not at all. It's just been busy all year long.
Well, what a wonderful year for you, and how appropriate, how wonderful. Now, it's wonderful that you do these one-man shows, because that's what your great-great-grandfather really wanted to be, am I correct? He wanted to be an actor, really.
Oh, absolutely. From a very young age, he found an absolute passion for storytelling on stage. He loved to be able to use his voice, to do different accents, different facial expressions, different ways of moving and standing. And he loved that idea with just very minimal input. He could absolutely change a scene, an emotion, an atmosphere, which kind of is what he did in his novels as well when he started writing. He wrote them in a very theatrical way, almost like a modern screenplay, that the scene plays out in front of you and suddenly you're drawn into whatever situation he's trying to create. So he absolutely loved the stage, and for a while as a young man, he was planning on becoming a professional actor. He took lessons, he practiced diligently all the things he was learning from his tutor. That didn't work out. He did have an audition booked at one of the main theatres in London, but he couldn't attend because he was suffering from flu at the time, so couldn't make it. And that kind of finished that part of his ambitions off. Now, he became a writer almost accidentally. He sort of drifted into it through journalism and then discovered that this love of storytelling could take place as an author as well as an actor. But as soon as he found fame as an author, he immediately went back to the stage, and he formed an amateur theatrical company. He surrounded himself by like-minded people, and they did lots of plays, mainly as charitable events, but got a very, very good reputation. And then that went into the reading tours, which were incredibly popular, incredibly theatrical, incredibly dramatic.
When he decided that he was going to perform his work instead of just stand there and do a reading of it, I'm curious, how did John Foster feel?
Well, Foster really felt that this was a very low form of entertainment. That it certainly wasn't the sort of thing that a figure in society, a good gentleman, should do. To appear on the stage and in the theatres, it just wasn't respectful. So he was quite horrified and really pleaded with Dickens not to do it. But Dickens wasn't having any of that.
In the 19th century, so many great literary, British authors found success in England, also in the United States, doing these tours.
Mm-hmm.
How was the tour for Charles Dickens? How did American audiences respond to him?
Well, he had a huge following in America anyway. Always had, right from the beginning. There was this wonderful anecdote of American readers desperately waiting to know what was going to happen in the plot of The Old Curiosity Shop, which was Dickens's fourth novel. And they couldn't wait for the books to be distributed, so they all went down to the dockside at New York City and waited for the steamer to come in, and were shouting out across the water to the ship's captain, what's happened in the plot? Is little Nell dead? That was what they were waiting for. So he always had this massive popularity. He had plans to come over a few years before in 1864, but America was otherwise engaged at that time, so that tour obviously had to be postponed. And by the time he did come back in 67, he was in pretty poor health. He was suffering quite a bit, and he also came into the grips of one of the worst winters the Eastern Seaboard had seen. So he wasn't in good health. He was struggling. He really wasn't the performer that he had been during his really top years in Britain. But still, the audiences packed the houses in their thousands to come and listen to him, and he managed somehow to drag up that energy that all performers have, however bad you're feeling, however ground down and ill you're feeling. As soon as you get on stage and the lights go up, bang, you're there. And Dickens wowed the audiences in America again. Mostly. Mark Twain witnessed one of his readings and was very scathing about the performance in New York. He said that he said that Mr. Dickens is a bad reader, and he said I was a great deal disappointed in Dickens' reading, and his voice was husky and monotonous in tone, and he didn't capture anything. Now the fact that Twain was about to go off on his own one-man tour, that there may have been a degree of professional jealousy in his comments, but no, the fact is that Dickens wasn't the great performer he had been when he came to America. But still, the audiences just wanted to see him, wanted to be close to this man who had energized their lives with his novels.
It's fascinating that the literary greatness of the time, you have Mark Twain, who's very skeptical of Dickens, and then we discussed this last year, you have Hans Christian Andersen, who became not only a friend, but he wouldn't leave Dickens alone.
Dickens and Andersen had a long correspondence,
Yes.
and they found a great deal in common. That they had similar upbringings, not wealthy upbringings, but quite poor. They both had a love of theatre. They both loved storytelling, and they had both found great success in their own countries as authors. So they shared letters, and Dickens was amazed by Andersen's superb command of the English language in his letter writing, and really felt a great kindred spirit. So I invited Andersen to come and stay at his house in England. Now, what Dickens didn't realize was Andersen was writing in Danish and having all his letters translated but by an intermediary. So of course, the English was perfect. He was a scholar in English, so of course it was good. And no, Dickens didn't realize this, and Andersen actually didn't speak a huge amount of English, and came to stay at the house, and didn't have the social nous to sort of know when the right time to leave was. So just stayed and started using the family as almost his personal servants. He demanded that Charles's son, Charles Jr., shaved him every morning, and young Charles was not any of that, and got a barber in to come and do it for him. But eventually Andersen went after about 3 weeks, I think. And Dickens ran upstairs with his family and put a notice above the bed saying, Hans Andersen slept in this bedroom for what to the family seemed like ages, underlined 3 times, exclamation mark.
Wow. Well, there you go. We're speaking with Gerald Dickens. Gerald Dickens is a wonderful actor, producer, and great-great-grandson of Charles Dickens. He is touring the world with his renditions of Charles Dickens. His one-man Christmas Carol is a huge hit here in the United States. And Tuesday, December 4th at 7 p.m. at the Wilson Auditorium on the Metropolitan Campus of Fairleigh Dickinson University. He is returning. It's a wonderful, wonderful performance. I loved it. And if you want to see it, please call 201-692-6500. As an actor, and also as the great-great-grandson of an actor-writer, do you know what Charles used as any form of warm-ups as an actor before his performances?
Well, I'm not sure warm-ups, but I know he had a fine concoction he would take in the intermission between shows, and that was a dozen oysters and a quart of champagne. So, who am I to argue against tradition? You know, it worked for him.
So that'll be in your green room for Tuesday.
Absolutely, it's in the contract rider. You know? Champagne and oysters at every venue. Yeah, right.
How did he play with the audience when he was performing? Was there a fourth wall, or did he break that fourth wall? It
was interesting. I mean, you see my show, and it's very much a theatrical show and involves the audience quite a bit. Dickens stood at a reading desk at a lectern in the centre of the stage, so there was no histrionics, there was no movement, there was no set as such. But within the reading, he was acting as the narrator. So from that point of view, he was very much telling the story, and the atmosphere he wanted to get was as if the audience was sat around the fireside listening to him, as if it was a family group, and he was just sat in the armchair telling his story to them. That was the kind of atmosphere he was after. Now, of course, then within the reading, he would break out into all the different characters and give them all voices and expressions and ways of standing and all the rest of it. But it was a very important part of the idea of the readings that everybody was in this as a shared experience. It wasn't, as you say, it wasn't the fourth wall really becoming a barrier between audience and him. He wanted it to be a family story by the fire before bedtime. That was the kind of idea.
An idea of a radio before radio existed.
I guess, yeah. He would have been wonderful on the... I can imagine him doing his own audiobooks. That would have been fantastic.
Now, you're doing audio as well now. I was on your website.
Well, again, that's very generous of you. Yes, I'm slowly working my way through recording the unabridged complete works of Dickens in the order he wrote them. So I am in the middle of recording Barnaby Rudge at the moment, which means we've done Pickwick, Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, and the Old Curiosity Shop. And as well as those, every Christmas I'm recording another one of the Christmas books. So we started with A Christmas Carol, and The Chimes, just done Cricket on the Hearth this year. So that's a wonderful experience, because it's much more, it's a very different style than the big performances on stage, just sitting in the studio reading Dickens, and of course no editing, so you get all the beautiful language, all the wonderful descriptions, all the little quirks of humour that if you're editing a show down for a theatre performance, you don't get. So it's really lovely to do those. You just appreciate the full genius of the man.
Did he have a favorite story?
Well, being a good marketing man, he usually said whichever one was just being published was my best ever, my favorite. This is the one I thought.
It's like a parent and a child. I mean, these were his children.
But I think probably the one that meant most to him was David Copperfield.
Really?
It was a very autobiographical novel, especially the first half of it. He had a very troubled childhood. His parents had been imprisoned for debt. He was left almost alone on the streets of London, being sent to work as a 12-year-old to try and raise the money to clear the debt. And those experiences had a profound effect on him. And he felt deeply, deeply ashamed and resented his parents for putting him into that situation. And he felt so ashamed that he could never admit it to anyone. He never told his wife, he never told his children that he'd been through this. Now, Copperfield, similar orphan child, I mean, obviously Dickens wasn't an orphan, but the child in the novel is, and is being sent to work in a factory and is being ill-used and is alone on the streets and surrounded by awful people. Dickens could get his story out. He could kind of exorcise it, but without admitting to anybody that it was him. And it's no coincidence that the initials of the lead character, David Copperfield, are Dickens' own initials, just reversed. So I think David Copperfield was a very important novel for him, and one he felt a great deal of affection for.
Do you have a favorite?
I love Great Expectations.
Really? Yes.
But the problem with answering that question is you say one novel and then you suddenly remember a fantastic character or a brilliant scene in another one. So you think, maybe it's that one, and you end up listing all 50. But I think overall, Great Expectations.
I've recently fallen in love with Nicholas Nickleby.
Well, you see, that's...
and it's really the character of Smike.
That is another one I absolutely love. And actually, Nickleby was the first novel that really inspired me to appreciate who and what Dickens was. In England in the 1980s, the Royal Shakespeare Company did a fantastic adaptation of Nickleby. It was an 8-hour-long epic, and the family were taken to see it. Now, I couldn't think of nothing worse than sitting in the theatre for 8 hours watching Dickens. My only experience up to that had been Oliver Twist as a set text at school, which we ploughed through and didn't do a thing for me. So the idea of 8 hours watching Dickens in a theatre didn't fill me with delight at all. But as soon as the show started, I was absolutely hooked, and suddenly I got it. I mean, these characters were larger than life. They were theatrical, and that made an impression on me. The theatrical link is what did it. So I have a very, very soft spot for Nickleby, and it's one of the shows I perform. I have a one-man version of Nickleby, and I love doing it.
Oh, there's just something so beautiful, but also the social activism in that story, because my heart broke for Smike.
Oh. Dickens travelled to the north of England, to Yorkshire. He'd heard about these terrible schools in the north of England, and he knew that he wanted to use them somehow in his next novel. He'd just come off the back of writing Oliver Twist, which was very dark and very socially aware, and had really exploited all sorts of terrible ills in British society. And he realized how powerful he could be by taking that sort of course. So he travelled to Yorkshire to visit the head teacher of one of these schools, posing as a prospective parent. And he spent 2 days in this small village. Now, the name of the head teacher was a man by the name of William Shaw. So he had the initials WS, which would eventually translate into the head teacher in the book, Wackford Squeers. So he didn't hide his inspiration very, very deeply. But then he found a little gravestone in the churchyard for a young pupil at the school who had died suddenly. And as he stood reading the inscription on the tombstone, he recalled later that is when Smike came to me. His little ghost came to me at that moment. And that's when he went back and wrote. And you're right, Smike is an incredible character of sympathy, and it's a wonderful novel.
One of many, but you're going to be coming with Christmas Carol, which is such a delight and a treat. And for all those listening who have not had the opportunity to see you, what can they expect?
Well, from my point of view, it is a theatrical experience. It's going to be fun. There's going to be a lot of laughter. There's going to be some tears. There's going to be some frightening moments. It's everything that you would expect from A Christmas Carol. It's not going to be a reading. It's not going to be a sort of dull lecture by some stuffy English guy. It's going to be a fun evening, and that's how people need to go and appreciate it. They're going to be an audience in a wonderful show, and by the end of the show, they're going to be wrapped up in the whole story themselves. They're going to be part of it.
It is truly wonderful. I am so excited about seeing it for a second time. Students at the university are excited, and we'll all look forward to seeing the show and meeting you afterwards.
Well, it's going to be a great, great pleasure to come back. It's a wonderful auditorium, and I had a wonderful time last year, so I'm really delighted to have been invited back.
Charles Dickens, thank you so much, and we're looking forward to